I'm Corey Prophet Boyd, and this is Say It Anyway.
Say it anyway with Corey Prophet Boyd. Say it anyway. Say it anyway with Corey Prophet Boyd. Say it anyway.
Have you ever noticed that once you've experienced a really significant loss, something inside you changes? I'm not talking about the obvious things, like feeling sad or crying at unexpected moments. Most people expect those parts. What they don't always expect is how one loss can quietly change the way you look at everyone and everything else in your life. For me, grief has never been about just missing someone. It's also been about realizing how temporary life really is. Once you've stood beside someone you love and watched them slip away, it's almost impossible to go back to believing that tomorrow is guaranteed. You begin to understand in a way you never did before that every conversation, every holiday, and every moment is something you'll never get back once it's gone. That realization can be beautiful, but if I'm being honest, it can also be terrifying. Before you've experienced profound loss, death often feels like something that happens to other families or other people somewhere far away. Then one day it becomes your story, and suddenly you realize everyone you love is living under the very same fragile conditions. And of course, that's a difficult thing to carry, but it's also something I don't think we talk about nearly enough. One of the biggest surprises about grief is that it doesn't stay neatly attached to the person, relationship, or chapter that ended. Instead, it has this strange way of spilling into every corner of your life. It changes how you celebrate birthdays and holidays, and sometimes it changes the way you love the people who are still here. Not because you love them less, but because you suddenly realize just how much there is to lose. If you've ever caught yourself hugging someone a little tighter or lingering just a little longer before saying goodbye, there's a chance grief had something to do with that. The bizarre thing is that grief can actually make us appreciate life more while simultaneously making us more afraid of losing it. Those two things can definitely exist together. You can be deeply grateful for the people around you while also quietly fearing the day that they won't be. And that doesn't make you broken. It makes you human. And maybe that's why grief can feel so exhausting. It's not just sadness. It's love trying to figure out what to do with uncertainty. Sometimes it also feels like we've unintentionally created this very narrow definition of what grief is supposed to look like. When someone dies, people understand if you're grieving. They send flowers, bring food, they ask how you're doing, and they expect you to struggle for a while. But what about all the other losses? What about the marriage that quietly came to an end after years of trying? What about the relationship that didn't end because anyone stopped loving each other, but because life simply took you in different directions? What about the career you poured your heart into that suddenly disappeared? Those losses don't usually come with casseroles, and people don't usually send sympathy cards. There's no funeral to give everyone permission to acknowledge what happened. And because of that, so many people convince themselves that they shouldn't still be hurting. But grief doesn't ask for permission. It just shows up wherever love, hope, identity, or belonging once lived. Maybe that's why so many of us are carrying grief without even realizing that's what it is. Coming up after the break, I want to talk about something that doesn't get nearly enough attention: grieving our pets. I want to talk about why losing a pet can leave an ache every bit as real as losing a person, why we should stop minimizing that pain, and why grief has never been about titles. It's always been about connection. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Say It Anyway. In the first part of today's episode, we've talked about various types of grief. There's one kind of grief that I think society has gotten much better about acknowledging over the years, but many people still feel like they have to apologize for it. and that grief is losing a pet. If you've never loved an animal as part of your family, it can be difficult to understand why that loss hurts so deeply. From the outside, someone might think, it was just a dog or it was just a cat. But anyone who's ever loved one knows better. They weren't just anything. They were the first face that greeted you when you came home after a long day. They curled up beside you when life felt heavy. They celebrated absolutely nothing except the fact that you walked through the front door. It didn't matter to them what kind of day you'd had, how much money you'd made, what mistakes you'd made, or whether anyone else understood you. They just loved you, quietly and consistently, without asking for anything more than your presence. And then one day the house becomes quiet. The leash stays hanging where you left it. The food bowl is gone. You still find yourself looking toward the door, expecting to see them, or catching yourself reaching for them before your mind remembers what your heart has been trying not to accept. That's grief. And not because the relationship was identical to losing a spouse or a parent or a child, but because the attachment was real and the love was real. And when love is real, loss is real too. And that's why we don't have to compare grief to validate it. Every relationship is different, and every loss is different. But every broken heart deserves compassion. One of the hardest lessons grief has ever taught me is that sometimes what we're mourning isn't only a person. Sometimes we're mourning a future we thought we'd have. Maybe you imagined growing old with someone, and one day that relationship ended. You didn't just lose the relationship. You lost the vacations you thought you'd take together, the holidays you'd pictured, the conversations you thought you'd still be having years from now. Or maybe you spent 20 years building a career that suddenly disappeared. People tell you to find another job, but they don't always realize you aren't just replacing a paycheck. You're trying to rebuild a piece of your identity. Sometimes grief is simply the distance between the life we pictured and the life we're living today. And acknowledging that doesn't make us ungrateful. It makes us honest. Maybe that's what grief has always been. Love with nowhere familiar to land. The love doesn't disappear when someone dies. It doesn't disappear after a divorce, or when a beloved pet takes its last breath, or when a career ends or a chapter closes. The love is still there. It just no longer has the same place to go. And that's why grief comes in waves. Some days you feel like you finally found your footing. Then a song comes on the radio, or you smell someone's perfume or cologne, or drive past an old neighborhood, or find an old picture. For just a second, your mind forgets, and then it remembers again. Those moments don't mean you've gone backward. They simply remind you that love leaves fingerprints. The people, animals, places, and even the dreams that mattered to us shape who we become. Their absence hurts because their presence mattered. Maybe that's why I don't think grief is something we're meant to so-called get over. I think we learn to carry it. Over time, it may become lighter, and the tears may come less often, but the love stays. And I'm glad it does, because I don't want to become the kind of person who forgets the people and experiences that shaped my life. Missing someone isn't a sign that you're failing to move on. Sometimes it's simply evidence that what you had was worth missing. If you're grieving today, whether it's a person, pet, marriage, friendship, a career, your health, or even a version of life you thought you were going to have, I hope you'll give yourself permission to stop measuring whether your grief is big enough. Loss isn't a competition. Pain doesn't need to qualify for compassion. The truth is, every one of us will spend our lives saying hello to new chapters and goodbye to others. It's part of the human experience. But here's the beautiful part. If grief is the price we pay for loving deeply, then maybe it's also proof that our lives have been filled with things worth loving. And while none of us would choose the pain that comes with loss, I think most of us would choose the love again and again. Because in the end, grief isn't the opposite of love. It's love continuing after the story has changed. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with me for this episode of Say It Anyway. I'm Corey Prophet Boyd, and until next time, keep being kind to yourself, keep showing up for the people you love, and if there's something on your heart you've been afraid to say it anyway.
Say it anyway. Everybody's got a story they don't tell out loud. A smile in the daylight, but they're hurting in the crowd. We've all been carrying questions, we've all worn a disguise, waiting for somebody else to finally realize. Maybe you've been holding back, afraid of what they'll say, but healing starts the moment you don't turn yourself away. There's a voice inside that's stronger than the fear you've known. You were never meant to carry all that weight alone. If you've ever needed hope, if you've ever needed truth, if you've ever needed someone who reminds you they're still good, so say it anyway. Even if your voice shakes today, every scar's a story, every heart deserves a place. You're not the only one who's trying to find their way. Come laugh, come cry, come breathe a little easier. You're more than what you've been through yesterday. Real stories, honest conversations. Come listen and say it anyway. From little towns to city lights, we're more alike than not. We all lose people that we love, we all forget we're enough. Sometimes life gets heavy, sometimes joy feels far away, but hope has a funny way of finding us someday. No perfect people here, no pretending to belong, just honest conversations that remind us to stay strong. A little humor, a little heart, a little truth to light the way. Sometimes that's exactly what we need today. Maybe this is the episode that changes how you see yourself. Maybe this is your reminder you don't have to do it by yourself. One conversation, one laugh, one tear, one honest moment can change everything. So say it anyway. There's somebody who needs your story today. Hope grows louder every time we choose to speak with grace. Together we're discovering we're stronger than the pain. Real stories, honest conversations, the things we think but rarely say. This is Say It Anyway with Corey Prophet Boyd, because sometimes the bravest thing you'll ever do is simply say it.